Okay. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board meeting, August 5th, 2021. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the July 1st, 2021 Citizens Advisory Board meeting. If you haven't had a moment to review them, please do. I'd take a motion to approve. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Please vote. The motion passed. Thank you. So now we'll move on to item number 3, which is the MAPS 4 Revenue and Expenditure Report. So, Mr. Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have in your packet the MAPS 4 Monthly Financial Report for the period ending June 30th, 2021. We'll start on the revenue side. For the month, totaled $10,791,679, and total program of $125,833,713. You can see that we're still showing 3.8% below projections, but I can tell you that July was another record check, so we are slowly gaining on that, and that will be reflected in next month's report. Then on the expenditures side, you can see the total of $890,889. This is broken out per subcommittee of projects, and we've just done this proportionally, and it's ADG charges and staff charges up to this point that it's taken to operate the office. So that's why those numbers are all different, even though we haven't done any construction or anything.
Any questions of Mr. Todd? Okay. If not, I'd take a motion in a second. Okay. Please vote. Okay. Motion passed. Thank you very much. So moving on to item number 4. Let's see the individual items for consideration. The first is the election of a vice chair for the MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board. I take any nominations if you've got one. So,
Teresa, I would move just, my experience on MAPS 3, what we did was we just started out with Ward 1 and moved around the horseshoe. It's been such an arduous responsibility to be vice chair this last year that I hate to recommend and nominate anybody to take that over, but I think it might make some sense just to start with Russell, Ward 1, and let him be the vice chair this next year, and then we just move around in succession after that. So I would nominate Mr. Pace.
Okay. Russell, will you accept the nomination? Thank you. Okay, so we'll take a motion in a second. Great. Please cast your vote. Yeah. Russell, you got to vote for yourself. We missing? Oh, okay. It looks like, yeah. Okay. Motion passed. Russell, thank you so much for your willingness to serve, and we will try not to wear you out too much.
Congratulations, Russell.
Yay. So the next item is recommend approval of the amendment number 1 to the contract for professional services. David?
Yes, ma'am. As you said, recommend approval of amendment number 1 to contract for professional consulting services with ADG PC for the MAPS 4 program. Project M4-PR001, increase $1,199,272.50, retroactive to July 1st, 2021 through June 30th of 2022. So ADG, if you recall, works as an extension of the MAPS office, and they also provide valuable consulting services. As we start into this next phase, hopefully very soon, they will have people that will review plans that we get. They'll help us organize the public meetings that we need, some of those things. They provide observation services out on the sites, and obviously the work that Jason and some of his people in the office do of help keeping the schedule up to date so we know where we are. Just a lot of the behind the scenes things that they do besides just showing up at meetings and doing presentations. So that I virtually work with Jason and his team every day. And this is an amendment to continue that relationship, evolving into a little different role, as I said, as the projects start to kick off, be doing some different things. But this is very much in line with what we have done in MAPS 3.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. Todd? If not, I'd take a motion and a second to approve the recommendation. I apologize, it looks like our little computers are a little slow for us this morning. Okay.
Increase of an amount for ADG. Why is it an increase in the amount? Is that not, did we not agree upon this at the original contract? Why does the verbiage say increase?
Because it goes annually, so we craft the amendment based on what we're going to be doing in the next year, so that it coincides with what we're doing. So this is an amendment for an increased fee for the work that'll be done in this next 12 months.
So the increase is related to the amount of work.
Exactly.
Okay. Does that help?
Okay, so what is the total amount they're getting paid then? So what is their total compensation for this next year?
We don't have a total over the entire stretch of the program yet. That will be developed as it goes along. There is a total up to this date, and that's in the contract. I don't know what that is. Jason, do you know offhand what that is?
No, I don't recall what the base contract amount was, but as David said, it's in there. It's roughly what you see in the amendment, so.
So Monique, is your question whether this is a change to the original contract?
Yes.
Yeah, the original contract was just for the first year of services. The amendment is for the next year of services.
So the first contract had things like providing a implementation plan. Once that's approved and we start on, then it's got things in there like providing full-time inspection for a certain project and review plans for a certain project, and provide partnering sessions with certain projects. So it evolves through the years. Laura?
So just to provide a little bit more context, which hopefully will be helpful, there are limitations in the way that the city is able to contract. And since this is a contract between ADG and the city of Oklahoma City, the city has to encumber all the funds for each year up front. So rather than encumbering for the 12-year contract that this could potentially be, we're doing it 1 year at a time.
Okay, and I understand that. I guess I have a problem with the verbiage of increase. So as you look at on page 3 where it says section 6.1, it says replace compensation and payment. And so it has total $2,674,000. Or is it saying that that amount is an increase of, that's the increase of the first year's contract? Or
That would be, it's the total of last year and this year.
And this year,
And
okay.
And next year it'll be 3 million something. It'll be
Oh,
the
okay.
total of the past 3 years.
Okay,
So that number will be cumulative over the course of every amendment for each year that we do.
okay,
Did
Okay.
did that answer your question?
yes.
Great.
Yes, it seems a little unclear, but,
Right. got it, understand. Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Please cast your vote. Okay, the motion passed. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll move on to item C, which is recommend approval of the MAPS 4 implementation plan. And I think,
So Madam Chair, we'd like to start off with Matt Stansberry, who is a sub-consultant for the Gooden Group with Katie Gustafson. All of you have seen the new logo with the plan that you've been given, but we'd like for the public and those watching, everyone see the new logo and how it evolves. So I'd like to let Matt
Absolutely.
Stansberry take us through that.
welcome, Matt. Glad to have you.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Yeah, I'm Matt Stansberry. I'm with Nominee Design. We've had the privilege of working on the MAPS 4 brand. Is the presentation going to be? Okay, perfect. Here we go. Great. So part of how we started off with this was a strategy exercise and really a brand discovery exercise. How we did that was, one of the things we did with that was we did 5 brand discovery workshops. That included input from a lot of key stakeholders, which included members of City Council, City Advisory Board members, city staff, and consultants. Where we started with wanting to get information was specifically around MAPS as a whole. The next slide will talk about MAPS 4, but with MAPS, what really does that mean to this group and these audiences? What really came to light was this idea of transformation and community. And then this third idea of imaginative and innovative, how unique MAPS is. But if you take those first two and put those together, you really get community transformation, which is what MAPS is. And when we wanted to get into MAPS 4 specifically, are there some differentiators with MAPS 4? What really came to the surface here was the number one thing was around inclusive, diverse. That concept became the number one leading concept. Also ideas around impactful future success, and then this idea of city pride. So I'm going to read a few of these direct quotes that came out of those sessions. So it includes all of OKC and residents. Every corner of the city will be affected. That goes into this inclusive, diverse idea. Voting yes for MAPS 4 significantly impacted voters' future in a positive direction. And then the third point here, I love talking about MAPS 4 in other cities. So again, that city pride. So we pulled out some descriptors from these as well. And again, it kind of hits on some of these same points. So MAPS 4 has projects touching every corner of the city. MAPS 4 is focused on improving everyone's quality of life. It's valuable to all people, not just people who can afford to purchase a ticket. And then this idea of we, not them. This is our MAPS. So there's ownership, which was really exciting to learn as we did this brand discovery process. Then pulling out from that, there really came these guiding principles, and this is what we use to filter every decision with the brand. And we thought this was really important to have these guiding principles. So that what they are is inclusive, impactful. We wanted to hit on this idea of city pride, quality of life, optimistic, and human. These were really important as we moved forward with the brand. And again, it had to embody these elements and these ideas. Then lastly here, before we get into the brand reveal section of this, wanted to read this brand positioning statement. MAPS 4 builds upon the success of previous MAPS programs with a collection of priorities designed to meet the needs of Oklahoma City today and tomorrow. Residents approved a package of inclusive projects that ensure our success is felt by everyone in our community. With this continued investment, Oklahoma City will be well positioned to meet new challenges, seize new opportunities, and leave a lasting legacy for future generations. So with this in mind, what it really came down to when we started really getting into MAPS 4, it comes down to people. So what is a city but its people? It's also its places, its history, its art, and its heart. These became our building blocks as we started thinking about MAPS 4 and the people of Oklahoma City. As you notice, as we reveal this logo mark here, the multicolored concept and the flexibility that we'll get into here in a second all represent this idea of inclusive, city pride, and diversity. We wanted the logo and the mark and the brand to be really flexible, so we created this modular design. Just as these projects and the people of Oklahoma City are unique, and how they come together, the Maps 4 brand comes together in a unique way as well. Can work in this form, can also work vertically, and just again, flexible and modular. It's also wanted to be totally unique, so created a custom typeface. We're calling it Maps Mono. We also wanted to expand on the idea and continue to evolve the brand of Maps 4. So here's an idea and a direction of the custom illustration style that we've created, and you'll see more of that in the implementation plan. Then how the mark looks in one color with photography. And the next thing we wanted to do is we wanted to take it even a step further. And we wanted to tell stories inside the Maps brand. And so in order to do that, we wanted to show you the steps that we took to get to these what we're calling windows into the city. So we did that by removing the negative space. This is not an altered logo. This is not what we're going to use as a logo itself, but wanted to show you how we got to this next phase here. So again, this creates these windows for us because we believe people are the windows to the city, and we want them to see themselves in the city. So here's an example of that. Here's the M, here's the A, here's the P, and here's the S, spelling out maps. Then we wanted to take it even further and just show some examples. So here's an example of that coming together where you can see the maps together, and here you see animals, you see people, you see art, you see places. Same thing here in this variation. And then we wanted to create some practical uses of the brand as well. So these are construction sign mock-ups, again, illustrative style, and here's a rendering. Again, we wanted flexibility because there's a lot of different projects, and how they need to be displayed can be really unique. And so we wanted the brand to be able to really work in all different settings. And this is one of the last slides, but thinking about wearables and thinking about city pride, putting on the brand and wearing it with pride around Oklahoma City and beyond. This example of that. And then lastly, leaving you with the Maps 4 logo. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate your presentation.
When can we buy some of the wearables?
David?
Soon.
Coming soon. Okay, so Jason? Moving on to the implementation presentation.
Yes. So I get the joy, at least I get to take my mask off since I'm up here. So sorry, I guess that's the benefit.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So it's great to see everybody this morning. Thank you for having us here. We're excited to be here. So it's a little bit surreal in a way to be here presenting this plan. I know probably most people think Maps 4 started in the summer of 19 when all the projects came before council. So it's hard to believe, but our office has been thinking and talking about Maps 4 since 2018. And so it's basically taken us 3 years of work to get to the point that we're at today. And so we're really excited. I could probably take about 20 minutes to thank all the people that have helped us along the way, but I do want to, and I'm not going to take that long, but I do want to take just a minute to thank a few folks. So it is not just me at ADG that puts this thing together. So we've got a really big team that's behind us. I think I'd like to start off with Tom Wilson, our company president. This is his 4th iteration of Maps to be through, and so Tom's been obviously great counsel for me personally and for our organization, I think, as we've navigated this program. Melanie Draper, AJ Kirkpatrick, Sandy, our whole team there at the office has been great, and they've supported us all along the way, so I can't say enough nice things about their hard work. And then, as you just saw Matt's presentation, Katie Gustafson and Gooden Group, we work with them a lot on the Maps 3 program and some other projects that we're involved in, and they are always a joy to work with. And so, Katie, thank you for all your hard work. So, the presentation this morning is very dense, so I'm just going to apologize for that in advance. I will get through it as quickly as I can. There's a lot of information. I think most of the board is familiar already with what we're going to be presenting this morning. But we have a lot of information. You've obviously seen the implementation plan. I don't remember the exact page count, but it's voluminous. There's a lot of information in it as well. And I think that really just echoes a little bit about how big of a program this is. $1 billion, 16 projects. It's a significant investment on the part of the public, on the part of the city, and so it takes a lot to get through it all. And so we're just really excited to be here, so thank you for your time this morning. So the presentation this morning, we're really just going to start off with an overview. So as most of you know, ADG's been working on the MAPS 4 program formally since November of 2020. That's when we received our notice to proceed from the City of Oklahoma City. And so since that time, we have been going through what I would call an iterative process. So as you know, the program made up of 16 projects. If you go back and read the resolution, there are projects within projects within projects. And so one of the first things that we do in this iterative process is we basically build a framework of all the projects. In that framework, we take a minute, we put budgets together for all of those individual pieces, and then we put a schedule together. And so once we go through that process, obviously it's a pay-as-you-go model. We've talked about this quite a bit, I think, already. We prepare a financial model. We look at that model, and then we have a conversation about where we need to make adjustments for whatever reason. And it's really just a process of adjusting and repeating it. So we've basically been going through that iterative process for 8 or 9 months now. And the program that you see here today, the implementation plan, the schedule, is what we've arrived at through all of that hard work. So there's obviously been a lot of inputs into the planning process. Obviously the MAPS 4 resolution, which we've talked about quite a bit, a lot of really great information. The MAPS 4 program is different from prior versions in that we have this great document to guide us on specifically what is to be achieved and accomplished with each one of the projects. And so our team looks to that document almost daily. We turn back to it all the time to just remind ourselves what the goal is of the projects and what the ground rules are for each one of them. Obviously, the Oklahoma City Finance Office is involved in this. They provide us sales tax projections. That's another input that's important, especially as it relates to our financial modeling. And then really, the rest of the input, there's a lot of plans, document studies that are publicly available. The two best examples of this are probably the Parks Master Plan update. Bike Walk OKC is another one. We're doing a lot of trails and sidewalks and things like that as a part of the MAPS 4 program. And so we've looked at those documents to help inform the plan. And I did these a little out of order, but we've also spent a lot of time with project advocates. We've talked a lot about this with the board already. We spent time with really advocates from almost every project, learning a little bit more about their projects, trying to just have a better understanding so that we have a complete picture in terms of how we're developing the program, the schedules, and the budgets. And then lastly, in terms of input, we obviously lean real heavily on prior experience. And so that's not only the experience of the MAPS office, or not only the experience of ADG. We've been doing this for a few years now, but probably more importantly, it's the experience of David and his staff at the MAPS office. He's got a great staff. They know how projects need to be delivered. They know how to execute projects. And so we've worked a lot with them and really tried to leverage all of that prior experience in terms of how to put the program together. So at a high level, purpose of this slide says I-plan. That's how we refer to it internally. The implementation plan is, as you know it, is obviously just communication of the program to everyone. And so first and foremost, that's to the residents of Oklahoma City. But also, obviously, to the subcommittee members when those arrive, the board, and to City Council. And so it's really just to get the program communicated to everyone. And so that's how we've put it together. Some of the specific topics communicated, if you've spent some time and you've reviewed the plan at any length, you'll notice that a lot of the bullet points that you see here on this slide are sections in the plan. We talk about some of the history of MAPS, the goals of the program, and then we also explain a little bit about the MAPS 4 process. So obviously, the board is intimately involved in that. We talk a little bit about the guiding principles, which we'll spend some time on here this morning. And then, most importantly, what I would call the real meat of the document, the scopes of the projects, the budgets for the projects, and the schedules for the projects. And so all of that information is obviously in the plan that you see this morning. So in terms of guiding principles, these are really items that really guided our development of the plan. And so first and foremost, I think what I would say is that we really wanted to show early movement. We wanted to try to be as aggressive as we could with the program, try to get everything moving at once, if at all possible. And so obviously, we have been able to do that in a lot of cases, and so we'll talk about that a little bit this morning. It was also important to us to think about the MAPS 4 Trust and the operation and maintenance dollars, the capital improvement dollars that are included in the MAPS 4 program. So $1 billion, if you were to go through and add up all of the dollars that the trust will ultimately be responsible for, it's just over $100 million. And so it's roughly 10% of the program, so that's no small feat, but it's important for us to get those dollars into the hands of the trust sooner rather than later. The sooner that we can do that, the sooner those dollars can be invested. Obviously, the greater the financial return, which is clearly a big benefit for the operators that will be using those dollars on an annual basis after we get the projects opened. So in addition to early movement, we wanted to be really thoughtful about scope development. And so first and foremost to us, that meant staying really true to the resolution. As I said, we turn back to that almost on a daily basis just to make sure that we're hitting the mark on all the projects and doing the things that we told the voters that we would do. We also thought a lot about trying to provide opportunities for participation. And so the clearest way to explain this, if you were to go back and read the resolution, you know, there's as an example, there's a $55 million allocation for sidewalks. And so what we tried to do in developing the program is break an allocation like that up into smaller packages so that it allows more design firms to get involved, it allows more construction firms to get involved, it lowers bonding requirements for people who are going to be constructing the work. And so it was really important for us to think about the MAPS 4 program and provide those opportunities where we could. The other benefit of doing that is it allows us to make progress quickly. As you might expect, it takes us longer, or it takes a design firm longer to design $55 million worth of sidewalks than it does to design $5 million. And so it enables us to get crews out in the city quicker and start constructing the improvements just as soon as possible. We also, I guess what I would say the flip side of this is in some cases, we wanted to avoid dividing work unless it was necessary or appropriate. And so one of the examples that I've shared with the board is projects like the Upper Park under the MAPS 3 program. So for that project, we had contracts with an organization to procure and install the trees. So we had one contractor that did that. We paid another contractor to basically build the park around those trees. And so it's not that the MAPS office can't navigate that if we need to. In some cases, we do. But obviously, that type of structure creates opportunities for gaps in scope. It creates creates the possibility of coordination issues. And so in cases where we didn't have to or we didn't think it was appropriate, we wanted to avoid dividing project scopes when possible. So in addition to the guiding principles, we obviously have financial requirements. We've talked quite a bit about this pay-as-you-go model. That's what MAPS 4 is founded on. And so as we've discussed before, we have some anticipation of how sales tax collections will come in each month. We get those projections from the Oklahoma City Finance Department. We keep track. David explained the collections report this morning. We keep track of cumulative sales tax collections. Obviously, if we put a schedule together and we understand those budgets, we have some understanding of when obligations may occur. We can forecast those obligations. And so putting those two things together really enables us to create this what I'll call a funds available for obligation curve. So the blue line that you see there in the image. So really, pay-as-you-go model simply means we have to keep that blue line above zero at all times. The other fallout from this is the city cannot take out debt against future sales tax collections. And so modeling this program against these requirements is something that we've been doing as a part of our process. So there have been some other considerations in addition to guiding principles and financial requirements. We have thought a lot about the fact that the MAPS program is this really deliberate, purposeful process, public process. There's subcommittees involved. There's a Citizens Advisory Board involved. There's City Council involved. And so going through all of those different levels takes time. And so what we've tried to do is build a schedule in a way that provides us time to go through those processes and navigate them as we understand that they will occur. We've also provided time in some instances for operators to build organizational capacity. And so all of the projects that we're going to build at one point or another will be turned over to an operator to operate. So some of the projects will be turned over to operators that have a lot of experience in operating their facilities. So think about a project such as the Coliseum. The State Fairgrounds has a lot of experience in operating venues like that. And so when we finish that project, they will be very comfortable taking over the reins of that facility. Other projects are not in that position. So projects like the Civil Rights Center is a good example of this. When that project opens, the group that will be operating that facility, it's not something that they've done before. And so they need time to build up organizational capacity, get the staffing in place, and be ready to open the doors to the public. And so we thought a lot about that as we were putting the schedule together. We also thought about Oklahoma City economic activity. Obviously, 2020 was a really rough year for the Oklahoma City economy. And some of the projects that are included in the MAPS 4 program will support the economy. And so we wanted to be thoughtful about that in terms of where we were placing projects in the schedule. We also wanted to consider inflationary adjustments. And so if you were to read the program, the implementation plan, there's a brief description of this. So the majority of the projects have not been adjusted for inflation. The budgets are as they are documented in the resolution, the allocations that are identified there. But there are some projects where inflationary adjustments are appropriate. So the best example of this is probably the youth centers. So if you were to go back and read the resolution, $70 million for 4 youth centers. Obviously, if we do those in multiple phases, we do the first phase in year 1, we do the 4th phase in year 10, and we're trying to make them all equitable to one another, there's going to be a cost differential between them. And so in cases like that, we have made inflationary adjustments. The number that we use, I've been asked this question previously, is 3% a year. And so if it's prior to the midpoint of the program, we adjust it down to 3% per year. If it's after the midpoint of the program, we adjust it up at 3% a year. We also looked at things like organizational capacity, and so we worked with David's office, put together a staffing plan. Obviously, if we take that staffing plan, we put it together with our program budgets and our schedule, we have an understanding of what the program will look like across, from the perspective of David and his staff across the life of the program. And so we generated some of the graphs that you see here just to understand what the workload might be. We also looked at what the construction market and the bid market might look like. And so one of the conversations that we had with David's office is this story of the MAPS for Kids program. So there was a time in the MAPS for Kids program where we were doing a lot of the same size projects, the same type of projects, and we were kicking them out relatively quickly. And so what that created was really a bid market in which it was hard to get competitive bids because all of the contractors that bid that type of work were really busy. And so what we did as a part of our analysis, we took the MAPS 4 program that we had developed. The city has a contractor pre-qualification process, and so we were basically able to take every piece of every project, estimate what type of contractor we thought might bid that work, and then really put those two things together and get an understanding of what the bid market looks like at specific quarters throughout the life of the program and what the construction market looks like. And so that's been really helpful too. So the project budgets, we've talked about this, I think, quite a bit over the last few months. A lot of the categories that you see here are very similar to the ones that you saw in the MAPS 3 program. I don't know that we need to go through these exhaustively. A couple that I would point out, we have taken the dollars that are going to go to the trust and categorize those as what we call investment fund dollars. And so that includes not only operation and maintenance dollars, but also capital improvement dollars. And so those are categorized as investment fund, as you see on this graph here. We've also included a budget category, we've called it grant. And really what it's trying to capture is dollars that we are providing to other entities in order to execute projects. And so the best two examples of this, the two places that you will see this in the program, are the Innovation Hall and the Homelessness Project. And so for both of those projects, the MAPS 4 investment is really, it's a part of a larger financial package. And so because of that, we need to make those dollars available, allow those projects to move forward. And so you'll see the funds for those two projects in particular categorized as a grant. So a lot of these budget categories will vary considerably from project to project. There are a few of them that are relatively consistent if you were to go back and study the budgets. And so construction and FF&E for most of the projects usually ranges from 65 to 75%. We've talked about a lot of these percentages along the way. Project contingencies, 5 to 10%, and then design, testing, and admin, usually 10 to 15%. The rest of those that you see there vary pretty considerably from project to project. So if you spend any time looking at the schedule that's provided in the implementation plan, you'll see all these colored blocks. Those blocks basically represent phases of work, and so those are really to us the building blocks of the project, and it's how we think about how a project might move forward. So I'm not going to go through these exhaustively, but what I would like to do is maybe just run you through a quick example so it's clear, I think, how the schedule's organized. We color code each phase of work according to what the activity is. And so this example that we've brought with us here this morning is from the Bus Rapid Transit project, one of the projects, the Northeast Oklahoma City project. So you read this from left to right. So as you go from left to right, time is passing. So we start off with The green box that you see there, this pre-design phase of work, and so that's where the city would go and advertise for a design firm. We would select a design firm, we would negotiate a contract, issue a notice to proceed. Once that's done, it allows us to move forward into design. And so the orange bar that you see there, that's the process by which the design team would be preparing a preliminary report, plans, specifications to build the project. For the Northeast Oklahoma City corridor, the BRT there, we do anticipate there'll be some site selection and acquisition that's necessary, and so you can see that shown there in that salmon-colored bar. And then also for BRT, we have a significant vehicle procurement requirement. And so we've identified where those funds would be obligated, showing those or representing those with the teal bar that you see there. And then finally, construction. That's obviously when we're constructing the improvements. And so the end of that really marks the end of construction. And so as you might imagine, putting all of these projects together, all these pieces, the budgets, the schedules, and everything, it's a little bit like putting a puzzle together. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 8 or 9 months, is trying to put it together in a way that we think makes sense based on all the information that we have. So really, I guess one thing that we wanted to do here this morning, it might have been a while since everybody's looked at the list of subcommittees. Just to remind you, there's 6 subcommittees. We've got a slide here that summarizes that. The 6 subcommittee names you see across the top. The lighter blue text that you see down below is the 16 projects that we have talked quite a bit about. And so that's how those projects are organized beneath each subcommittee. So the rest of the time here this morning, I'm just going to take a minute. I'm going to go into each subcommittee, explain to you what the budget looks like at a high level, walk you through the schedule, and then we'll get wrapped up. Okay? All right, so starting out with the Civil Rights Center, $25 million budget. You can see here at a high level what the budget looks like. $16 million allocated to the Freedom Center and the Claire Looper Civil Rights Center. $9 million dedicated or allocated to an operating and maintenance fund. That operating and maintenance fund will support operations at both the Freedom Center and the Claire Looper Civil Rights Center. So from a schedule perspective, we're going to look at several slides just like this morning. Every time I've done this in the past, I'm able to point to it, and I can't do that this morning, so I'm going to do my best to do this without pointing. But just to give you a little bit of frame of reference, so the black bars that you see on these schedule slides are one of the 6 subcommittees. The darker gray boxes that you see on the right are one of the 16 projects. And then the lighter gray boxes are essentially groupings underneath each one of those projects. So they're allocations that are identified in the resolution. So in explaining I guess the schedule, a couple of things I would note out on this first schedule. You'll see this in a lot of the slides. You'll see this blue box with a note that says transfer to trust. And so really what we're trying to identify there is the process by which the city would go through to take those funds, send them to the trust, and allow the trust to then invest those dollars. And so sending those funds to the trust are essentially dollars leaving the program from our perspective. They're funds that are obligated, and so we try to model them and account for them, not only from a budget perspective, but also from a schedule perspective, the timing of those, when those funds go to the trust. You can see we have the transfer to the trust occurring in the second half of this year, 2021. We have provided some time to develop an operating agreement for the entity that will be operating the Civil Rights Center. We've also provided time for site acquisition. So both the operating agreement and the site acquisition will end sometime in early 2023. The site acquisition there is associated with the fact that the Oklahoma City Urban Renewal Authority owns a lot of the property around the Civil Rights Center, and so there's a process that will need to be navigated in order to transfer that to the city. There's also, I guess what I would say as I explain the Freedom Center renovation schedule and the Civil Rights Center, as you can see, we have the Civil Rights Center starting at the end of 2022. So there's obviously been a little bit of conversation, I think, publicly about the desire for the Northeast Oklahoma City community to retain ownership of the Freedom Center. And so if in fact that needs to happen, obviously those dollars would likely be reallocated into the Civil Rights Center. So we've tried to line these 2 projects up so that the bidding for both of those projects coincide with one another. And so if in fact that happens, it really would not impact our financial model. And so that's why they appear on the schedule in the way that they do. In terms of whether or not or when those dollars might be reallocated, our understanding is that would take an act of city council to do that. And so while we fully appreciate the fact that that may eventually happen, we basically have put this together per the requirements of the resolution, at least for today. So for the community subcommittee, 4 large projects: mental health and addiction at $40 million, the Family Justice Center at $38 million. homelessness at 50 million, and the diversion hub at 17 million. So one thing I want to point out for this graph, we have tried to identify on the graphs if there's any specific dollar amounts identified in the resolution, any specific allocation amounts. And so if you were to take the mental health and addiction project, $40 million, there's actually 3 separate budgets or allocations that are identified in the resolution. $22 million for the Restoration Center, $11 million for 2 crisis intervention centers, and $7 million for transitional housing. And so we've identified those budgets within the $40 million budget for mental health and addiction. And so really this is what the budget for that, the community subcommittee looks like at a high level. So from a schedule perspective, the community subcommittee is going to be very busy early in the program. As you can tell from this schedule, we have really diversion hub, family justice center, restoration center, and the first mental health crisis center all starting their operation agreements really right after plan adoption, so really towards the second half of 2021. If you were to study the schedule, you can also see that 2025 will be a really big year for this subcommittee. So all those same projects, Diversion Hub, Family Justice Center, the Restoration Center, both mental health crisis centers are anticipated to be opening in that year, and so that'll be a huge year for that subcommittee in particular. We have, I'm skipping down to the transitional housing piece, we have staggered the transitional housing piece a bit from the Restoration Center. The reason for that is we've had some conversations, I think, as we've gathered information, that there may be some benefit to co-locating those 2 projects. And so by staggering them, we feel like we've provided ourselves an opportunity to perhaps have that conversation and figure out if that is in fact the right way to approach those 2 projects in particular. The homelessness project, just a minute here to describe that. So we've taken the $50 million and we've essentially divided it into 5 different, what we're calling grant allocations. And so think of them as 5 $10 million packages of work. You can see we have a process by which we would select a grant recipient. There's a process by which the city would need to develop an operating agreement with that grant recipient, and then obviously obligate the funds for their use. So the light gray bars, as I mentioned earlier, would be that entity moving those projects forward. We fully anticipate that part of the operating agreement will likely describe some process by which that operator would come back to the city, come back to the subcommittee, come back to the Citizens Advisory Board, come back to City Council, explain the status of those projects, what's going on with the project, and just really report back on how the work is progressing. And so that's what we think that those light gray bars look like, I think, as we're moving through the program. So moving on to the connectivity subcommittee, 3 projects for this subcommittee: transit, $87 million, sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, and streetlights, $87 million, and then beautification, $30 million. The beautification project, I guess what I would say, there's obviously a lot of components to each one of these. For the transit package, obviously the vast majority or a considerable portion of that budget is devoted to advanced transit, $60 million. For sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, and streetlights, you can see the sidewalks and related amenities coming in at $55 million, which is also obviously a significant portion of that budget. And then as it relates to beautification, you can see that we have that divided. There's a $5 million operating fund in that budget, and so we've identified that. The other $25 million, the balance of that budget, would go to the beautification projects themselves. So from a schedule perspective, starting with beautification, you can see that we've identified transfer of the $5 million operating and maintenance fund to the trust very early in the program, second half of 2021. The resolution, if you were to go back and read it, it's got a really somewhat of a laundry list in terms of specific beautification projects that are intended to be executed with this project. And so what we've done, obviously it's not efficient for the city to go out and bid and design, or design, bid, and build all of these individual parts by themselves. And so what we've done is we've aggregated them really into $5 million packages. And so you can see that those phases are starting, or those packages are starting late in 2021, and really just occurring on about a 12 to 18 month rhythm throughout the first few years of the program, with the last one ending sometime in 2029. Moving on to sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, and streetlights, starting with at the top with the $55 million allocation for sidewalks and related amenities. So obviously there's a lot going on in the schedule for this project in particular. So the easiest way to understand the schedule is the blue bars that you see there are construction. And so we've taken the $55 million, we've divided it into 10 construction packages, and so each one of those blue bars are a construction package. We feel that each one of we've also organized the program into 5 design contracts. And so each one of the green boxes that you see in the schedule, think of that as a design team. So each one of those design teams would be responsible for executing 2 construction packages. And so really they're occurring on about a 12-month rhythm starting in the second half of 2022, ending in about 2030. And so we'll really be building sidewalks throughout the life of the program, the middle of the program. Bike lanes, $20 million. You can see we've taken a similar approach. In this case, 4 or $5 million packages of improvements. We've organized those into 2 separate design contracts, and so that work will start in 2023 and finish in 2029. And then you can see the trail improvements, $8 million starting in the first half of 2023 with pre-design. Bidding and construction would start in the second half of 2024, finishing up in early 2026. There at the bottom of the slide, make sure you don't miss this, there is a $4 million for the street lights. And so the way this project in particular was described to council is $4 million to fund the installation of, I think it was 1,000 new street lights. So one thing that we've uncovered as a part of preparing this program is the fact that the City of Oklahoma City has an agreement with OG&E that will allow OG&E to fund installation of those street lights. And so the idea is that we could instead devote these dollars to something, I guess, above and beyond that. And so the idea is that we can basically transfer these dollars to the trust and allow them to make better use of those dollars, basically stretch them further. So we do fully anticipate that there will be a process that we will go through with the subcommittee to identify where those new streetlights installations are and what the priorities are. And so we anticipate that'll be a part of the process too. So moving on to transit, $87 million. We've worked very closely with Jason Fairbrush and Embark in developing this schedule. And I think the thing I would leave you with as it relates to this project is almost every one of these projects, they really represent additional operational dollars for Embark. And so it's really important that we time these correctly so that Embark as an organization is ready to assume the operational expenses of each one of these projects. And so some of the things that Jason and his staff identified for us that they wanted to get accomplished early on are included in this planned growth allocation, $5 million. And so you can see there, I believe Jason's already spoken about it with the board, but some land acquisitions that need to happen on South May Avenue. And so we've got that occurring early in the program, as well as several planning updates that Embark needs to get executed. And so those planning updates will help inform the rest of the work to some degree, but obviously, they have a desire to get that work started sooner rather than later. As it relates to bus stop improvements, $10 million. So we've divided this into 2 $5 million packages of work. The first one starting in late 2021. The second one starting in late 2022 and finishing in early 2025. And then moving on down the list, enhanced bus service, $12 million. You can see we have traffic signal priority starting in 2023, finishing in 2025. There are several additional buses that are included in the MAPS 4 program. So in discussing this with Embark, what we arrived at is the fact that they don't need to purchase all of those buses at once. And so the way it was described to us is it almost appears as though they need an annual procurement of a bus or 2. And so that's why this piece in particular, you'll notice the really long duration there. We're really just trying to model the fact that we're going to have this annual allocation that will enable Embark to go and purchase buses. And then the last group of projects, advanced transit, $60 million. And discussing this package with Embark, obviously they're in the process of designing and soon to be building the Northwest BRT, and so there's a need for park and ride facilities to support that project. You can see that we have a first phase of park and ride moved up very early in the program, starting in the second half of 2021 and finishing in 2023, again to coincide with the completion of Northwest BRT. The rest of the park and ride improvements would be starting in 2026 sometime, finishing in 2029. And then you can see the rest of the specific projects there, microtransit also starting about that same time. And then the 2 bus rapid transit lines. We've already talked about the Northeast Oklahoma City one a little bit this morning, but Northeast OKC would start in the second half of 2024, finishing sometime in 2028. And then the South Oklahoma City corridor starting in the first half of 26 and finishing in 29. The Northwest BRT line has been a really big benefit for these 2 projects in particular because it's allowed us an opportunity to almost have a case study for these two projects. So we looked to the Northwest BRT in terms of schedule and used what we learned there to really inform how we've put those two projects together. So as it relates to Innovation District, really one project, one of the 16 projects, if you were to go back and read the resolution, but really 4 distinct components. And so $71 million in total, and a $21 million operating fund, $15 million for the H.B. Foster Center, $25 million for connectivity. You can see there, if you were to go back and read the resolution, we've talked about this before, but there is some requirement in the resolution that half of that $25 million allocation be dedicated to neighborhood connectivity, and so we've made that distinction here on this graph, the summary. And then obviously Innovation Hall, $10 million. That $10 million, as a resolution identifies, is really part of a larger financial package. It's part of a match, and there's obviously been some conversation about that project already publicly. So $71 million in total. You can see the schedule here, starting with the operating and maintenance fund. Again, similar to some of the other projects being transferred to the trust very early, the second half of 21. We've taken the connectivity work, the neighborhood connectivity, $12.5 million. We've divided it essentially into 2 $6 million packages. So the first of those starting in the second half of 2021, finishing in the first half of 2024, and then the second package starting right after that and finishing in 26. And then the I-235 bridge improvements. And so you'll notice from this, obviously we have this starting in 25. There's this extended design allowance. There's extended construction schedule as well. All of that work needs to happen over the ODOT right-of-way. There's obviously coordination that needs to occur in order to allow that to happen. And so that's the reason for that extended schedule that you see in our program schedule. We have H.B. Foster starting early in the program with an operating agreement, second half of 21, starting construction in the second half of 23 and finishing early in 25. And then as I mentioned previously, Innovation Hall, again, this is a grant project if you were to go into the implementation plan and look at the budget. And so we have it beginning with establishment of an operating agreement in the second half of 21, obviously making those dollars available to that development team. And then really that development team moving that project forward throughout 22, 23, finishing in early 24. So that's how we have it positioned on the schedule. So neighborhoods, 4 projects here, $140 million for parks. Obviously a lot of different components inside that $140 million, and so you can see those identified there. The youth centers, $110 million in total, so $70 million for the youth centers themselves. $30 million operating fund, a $10 million capital improvement fund. The senior wellness center, so you can see that's divided 50-50 between an operation and maintenance fund and a new senior health and wellness center, $15 million, and then obviously the animal shelter at 38, shown there in the yellow. So $318 million in total. So for the neighborhood subcommittee, starting with the animal shelter, as you can see from the schedule, we have it starting in the first half of 23 and finishing towards the middle of 26. We have the $16.5 million, I'm moving down into the park section now, $16.5 million operation and maintenance fund being sent to the trust in the first half of 23. And then the next set of work, the next set of packages of work are really associated with the $63 million that's identified in the resolution for neighborhood and community park improvements. And so you can see there we have that $63 million organized across 10 different construction packages. So just think of them as 10 $6 million packages of work, 5 different design contracts. We have provided time in the schedule for a planning exercise, and so there will be a process that we need to go through to allocate that $63 million across all of the parks that money will be spent on. And so we've provided time in that. We think that there's potentially going to be some need for community engagement at that point in the program, and so that will likely be occurring as well during that initial phase. So moving on to the next group of projects. So we've called this public space transformation, and so if you were to go back and read the resolution, there's a long laundry list of specific park projects. Things like community gardens and pickleball courts and improvements at Booker T. Washington Park and things. So what we've done, again, to try to be as efficient as possible with the delivery method is we've grouped these into 4 packages of work. So think of them as 4 $5 million park packages. And so we have the first one of these packages starting right around the middle of 22. And you can see they're happening on about a 12-month rhythm from 2022 all the way with the last package ending sometime in 2030. So soccer, obviously, there's a $29 million allocation for soccer, identified for both Cameron and South Lakes Park. We have that work starting very early in the program, in the first half of 21, finishing sometime in the first half of 24. And then as the resolution identifies, there are 5 or 6, I think, river projects that need to be executed. And so we have combined those projects into 4 phases of work, the first one starting in the first half of 23, and then really just on about a 12-month rhythm from that point forward, with the last phase ending sometime in 2029. So senior health and wellness, $30 million. The $15 million that I mentioned about for the operating and maintenance fund would go to the trust in the second half of 21. We have the senior wellness center starting towards the end of 23. Design would occur throughout 2025. Bidding and construction starting in 2026, finishing around the middle of 27. And then we have obviously the youth centers. So the youth centers, as you can see, we have $30 million. The operating and maintenance fund going to the trust very early in the program. The $10 million capital improvement fund going to the trust in the first half of 23. And then in the bottom, you'll see the $70 million allocation for youth centers. And so the way that we've assembled this, we've assumed a structure by which the city would select an operator and develop an operating agreement with one overarching operator. And so that operator would obviously partner with other community agencies at each specific location as appropriate. But we have that selection early on in the program, starting right after plan adoption in 21. We think that there's probably a need for a programming and a planning exercise, and so we've made an allowance in the schedule for that. And then really the remainder of the work, we've just organized it into 4 phases of work, with the first one starting in the first half of 23. Finishing in 26, and then really about on a 12-month cycle after that, with the last one opening in 2031. So the last subcommittee, venues. So 3 projects here. The Fairgrounds Coliseum, $63 million, multipurpose stadium, $37 million, and the downtown arena at $115 million. And so a couple things I would point out. So for the downtown arena in particular, there is a requirement in the resolution that only a certain percentage of that total budget can be spent on the practice facility, and so I think it's 9% is what's listed in the resolution, and so we've identified that budget there on the red part of the graph that you see. We've also, I guess what I would say, is had a lot of conversations during the development of the program regarding the Coliseum, and so as we've talked about before, design of the Coliseum is currently underway. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the condition of the Nork Arena today and just how important it is to the city of Oklahoma City in terms of being an economic generator. So the challenging thing about the Coliseum project is that the resolution identifies multiple funding sources, and so $63 million is not all that's needed to support that project. So in addition to that $63 million, you also have the additional funding from MAPS 3, which has already been dedicated, $25 million in hotel motel tax revenues, naming rights for the new Coliseum, and I feel like I'm forgetting one. That might be it, those 3 additional sources. So obviously 2020 was a really bad year for hotel motel tax revenues, and so the fact that the project is currently in design, the fact that it's obviously an economic generator for the city, obviously there's a desire to try to move that project forward sooner rather than later, and so we've done a lot of analysis as it relates to being able to basically advance that project, $25 million out of our existing collections. So just to be clear, this is not borrowing against those collections. These are collections that we currently have on hand. And so we would basically advance those dollars to the Coliseum project. We've basically put together a model that assumes that those dollars would then come back into the program in approximately 3 years, so around the first half of 2024. And so you'll see some of that, I think, in the plan if you were to flip through it. So as it relates to schedule, the venues, just starting with the downtown arena, as with the park project that I mentioned previously, we do feel like there is a need for some preliminary planning work to be done, and so you'll see that identified here on the schedule starting in the second half of 21. There are also a couple of packages of work that need to be executed relatively quickly at the arena, some things that need to go in that are going to occur internal to Paycom Arena, and so you can see that those are positioned very early in the program starting in 21. The major phases of work will occur starting in around 2024, and so you can see we have those identified there, one of them finishing in the fall of 27, one finishing in the fall of 28. And then lastly, the practice facility improvements, which we've already talked about a little bit this morning. And so those will march ahead really on their own schedule, starting in 25 and finishing in 27. The Coliseum, as I said, we've already started design work on that project. It is currently in process. We anticipate that that work could be done as early as the first half of 22, which would enable us to bid that project and allow it to move forward. We currently anticipate a 24-month construction schedule, so opening sometime in the summer of 24. And then the last project, multipurpose stadium, $37 million. As you can see here, development of an operating agreement is obviously the first order of business there. We do have this relatively extensive site acquisition and design process. I guess what I would say is an allowance in the schedule for that. There's been a lot of conversations about where that facility might be located, and although we don't think it will be as extensive of a conversation as it was with the convention center, we tried to provide time in the program schedule to allow us to go through that process and determine the best place to locate that facility. And so you can see that's how we have it positioned on the schedule. Construction, by our estimation, would start in the first half of 25 and finish towards the end of 26. So that is it. That's really the schedule, just a bite at a time. So obviously in the back of the plan, there is a schedule that shows everything together. So I guess some key takeaways that I'd like to leave you with just really in closing. Obviously, our program schedule really assumes plan adoption in August of this year. And so obviously that takes the recommendation of the board, that takes approval by city council. And so obviously this is an important step that we're taking today. What I would say is the longer that takes, the more that the schedule will slide back. And so we would just offer that up to make sure you understand what we've assumed. We do have, if you were to go back and look at all the schedules, I know I stepped through it relatively quickly, but if you were to go back through all the investment funds that need to get to the trust, we have all of those funds being transferred to the MAPS 4 Trust by the first quarter of 23. And so we think that's a really good thing. That's no small feat. That's roughly 10% of the overall program budget, just over $110 million. And so those are dollars that the trust will be able to invest relatively soon. And by our estimation, that's really good for those operators. Those are dollars that will be better able to support them in their operations of these facilities. We do have a relatively aggressive schedule. So if you were to go back and look at all 16 projects, we basically enabled all 14 of the 16 projects to start by the end of 22. And really to drive this point home, I'm going to spend just a few minutes with you here describing some of the modeling that we've done. And so this graph that you see here is what we have referred to internally as our cash flow curve. In reality, it's a funds available for obligation curve, which is obviously a mouthful. So if you think back to one of the slides that I shared with you earlier this morning, it's essentially the blue line that we talked about earlier this morning. So the idea is to keep this thing above zero. That's what allows this model to work. And so the curve that you see here is really where we started. And so as I mentioned, ADG started our work in November of 20. We put together a framework, we put budgets on the projects, we assembled a schedule, and this is what we arrived at. So since that time, we have been charged with being as aggressive as possible with this program, so trying to move projects forward sooner rather than later. And so you can see how much our funds available for obligation has come down. And so I really think that's a testament, I think, to how aggressive that we've been with the program and how quickly all of the projects really will be moving forward. So I guess another takeaway that I would leave you with, obviously we've done a really rigorous analysis. We've looked at this program just about every way that we know how to look at it. We've obviously looked at all the budgets and the schedules. It's a lot of information, and we've spent our time really doing our homework. And so we feel really good about the program. It's obviously been informed by a lot of different things. We've had this extensive information gathering process that we've been through, and so that's informed the plan. And then, as I said earlier, really just all the experiences, not really so much of our office, but primarily of David and his staff. They've been a great help, and obviously I've been running this program successfully for several years, and so we really like where we're at. We like this plan that we brought forward, and we're ready to move forward. So with that, I will open it up to questions and comments. Thank you guys for your time. I know it's a lot of information.
Jason, thank you so much. It is a tremendous amount of work that you and your team have put in. Lots of hours of conversations with advocates and all kinds of input. So thank you for putting it in a digestible form.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So do we have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, Jason, one question. You look at what's going on with building materials in the United States today, and we see that steel since February has gone up approximately 300%. What are your thoughts on building materials where they are now, and what impact that will have on rolling out this plan, if any?
Well, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. A lot of the construction management firms that we work with, obviously there was the market was obviously rapidly increasing. It's starting to come down some, but who knows how long it might take for it to return back to where it was. It may never return back to where it was. So I do think that's going to be something that we're going to have to think about. I think it's going to be particularly challenging for those projects in which there was some preconceived idea of what the projects would deliver, what the scale of the projects would be. I think it's going to be particularly challenging for those. For the projects that have not really gotten started yet, I think it's maybe less of an issue. I mean, the budget is what the budget is, and so those are the parameters that we have to work in. Hopefully the market will normalize a little bit, but it's obviously going to be a challenge, especially over the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Right. We do have somebody signed up to speak on the implementation plan, so Tina Belchick. If you could come forward. And just as a reminder, we ask public comments to stay at 3 minutes.
Good
Thank you for
morning,
being here.
and thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. First, I want to say thank you so much for the service that you are giving to our community. I know this must be just an incredible investment of time and effort, and clearly a lot of very intentional thought and consideration has gone into all the work that's been done to date, and very grateful for that, so thank you. I know that every project in here, all 16 of them are deserving. All of them have advocates. And somebody feels passionately about all of them, and they're all going to benefit our community. And so I don't want to in any way suggest that mine that I'm going to advocate for is any more important than any other, but it's certainly no less important than any other. As a member of a national organization that is the leading provider in the United States of youth development services, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't come and implore you to maybe take a closer look and see if you can sharpen your pencil a little bit on the youth centers. Our kids are in crisis. I run youth centers every day. It's the only thing we do. I can tell you right now, nationally, the statistic is that our kids are 7 to 16 months behind in school due to COVID. Nobody's fault. Teachers went to heroic measures. Kids and parents, everyone did. It's just kind of where we are. The timeline really depends on things like how long they were out of school, whether they live in poverty, if they have Wi-Fi in their homes. All of those move the needle. And unfortunately, in Oklahoma City, we have an awful lot of kids that are at the furthest end of that timeline. I can also tell you from a mental health standpoint, our kids are in crisis. I've never seen anything like it. We've never made this many referrals before, not only to DHS, but unfortunately to the suicide hotline. Our kids need us, and they need us now. They don't need us 5 years from now. I mean, they will need us 5 years from now, but they really need us now. And I know that we may not be able to move everything, but if we could even look at 1 or 2 and moving those a little further forward, I think we could meet some critical needs in our community, particularly in 1 or 2 areas that we have identified through an awful lot of demographic factors. We've looked at everything from density of population, performance in school, mobility rates, income levels, gentrification of the population, a lot of different things. And there are a couple of areas that just jump off the page that need us now. And I would just say my very first thought would be the Woodson Park area. And because of that, I can tell you the levels of need are so great, the outpouring of cries for help has been so great. We are, with a week from Monday, more than doubling in size. And it has been a heroic effort to raise the money to do that, but it's because our kids need us. And where we had the hardest time finding a place that we could serve our youth was in that, I'm going to call it the Woodson Park area, but it's the surrounding area there. There are no options for these kids. And some of the statistics, if you've looked at any OP&A data that the state has, if you've looked at any of the surveys, when you look at things like 25% of the kids had said they either contemplated or planned suicide, and 15% of them attempted it in the last year. Those were statistics before COVID. I can tell you anecdotally, those are much higher now. 90% of the kids had moderate to high depressive symptoms, and 70% had moderate to high psychological distress, and over 50% of them are what we would classify as high risk. We've got to do something. Things were so dire in that area, and we were so desperate trying to find solutions. We looked at everything. I ended up going to Melinda at Parks and Rec, Melinda McMillan Miller.
4 minutes.
Okay, can I finish the sentence and I'll be done? We have put together a partnership to try and serve those kids, where we will run most of the programs, and Parks and Rec will run the healthy lifestyles component in the gym and in the fields. We're having to put kids in buildings that are almost a half a mile apart in that park. We had to raise money to buy a bus to bus the kids back and forth to where they have to go, and they're going in the back room of a senior center because we're so desperate for a place. So I guess I would just like to ask if there's any opportunity to maybe sharpen our pencil, if we could look at that. I know there are many critical needs, but I think our kids deserve to be one of those critical needs we consider. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. Okay. Any, sure.
Just to amplify on what Tina said, a couple of points as far as our youth and kids are concerned. I had a lengthy conversation last night with the city manager about this. We had a conversation this morning. Teresa and I had a conversation. I tried to get hooked up with David Todd, who is always extremely helpful, but last week he took a couple of days off for a much needed vacation. And I promised the city manager that I wouldn't nitpick the great work that ADG has done. But I have great concerns about letting this implementation plan go forward at this very moment. I think it needs to be reviewed. I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. In 2017, Tim McLaughlin came to me, and I don't know if you all know Tim McLaughlin, but he started this program called Fields and Futures. And his goal is to build 50 some odd fields to get our kids off the streets and onto the fields, so they'll further not only their athletic career, but also, as he puts it, the coach talks them and tells them they can't play if they don't have good grades, and it helps them in the schools. He came to me and he said, Mark, I need some wellness centers. And so in 2017, a group of us formed together to present to the mayor these 4 youth centers. We went to the mayor. The mayor said, go out and visit with people, see if there's an interest in this. We talked from everybody from Steve Lackmeyer to Paula Lewis, and there was an abundant, everybody was really encouraging about us moving forward with this. We got Peter DeLisi involved. We got the head of Parks, Doug Cupper, involved. We got Police Chief Bill City involved. And the one thing that came true was that, just as Tina mentioned ago, we have really 6 high priority locations that we need to deal with our youth now. As Tim McLaughlin says, we needed to do this 2 years ago. And so in looking at the plan, the thing that jumped out at me is, number one, for youth, we decided to put that off, starting construction, until the middle of 2025. And then more importantly, after I sat on the MAPS 3 advisory board, and I called Bob and talked to him about this too last night, but if you look at the senior wellness centers, for an example, it took us 13 years to build those 4 senior wellness centers. If we stagger these youth centers, the last one will be completed in 2038 if it takes 13 years. And at that time, I'll be 78 years old, and I will feel like, personally, that I failed the youth of this city. Because if we get these children into these youth centers, where Peter DeLisi is teaching them the arts from the Arts Council of Oklahoma City, and Tim McLaughlin is teaching them soccer and keeping them off the streets, we will have great results. And the reason I know that is because there is a study, and Tim McLaughlin is the one that brought this to me, and it's how Iceland got teens to say no to drugs. And I'm going to read you just one sentence, or 2 sentences from it, but they were having this problem in Iceland. Kids, both parents are working, kids get out of school, they go hang out with their older siblings, they drink, they smoke, they get into crime. And their crime rates were just horrible. And so they implemented this program, and I call it Operation Iceland. And Tim said, and I'm being funny here, Tim said I'm out of the branding department because he doesn't like the name Operation Iceland. But this program, I just wanted to read this to you. Today, Iceland tops the European table for the cleanest living teens. The percentage of 15 and 16-year-olds who had been drunk in the previous month plummeted from 42% in 1998 to 5% in 2016. The percentage that used cannabis was down from 17% to 7%. Those smoking cigarettes every day fell from 23% to 3%. And the way they did this was with soccer fields. The way they did this was with youth centers. And as a result of this program, the results they've had with their kids, Iceland's a small country, but this is the first time, in 2018 was the first time that Iceland made the World Cup. And it was because of this program, and it was because they addressed their youth. And so I don't mean to go on about this too long, but I am really concerned about starting this project for our youth in the middle of 2015. And I'm really concerned, even considering the prices of building materials, that the finishing of it could be sometime after 2038. And so today, I'm going to move to defer this because I'd like to be able to sit down with David. I'd like to be able to sit down with Jason, and I'd like to understand how we arrived with our youth centers in this position, which I do not think provides justice for our youth. If we don't take care of our kids on the front end, when they're 7 to 15 years of age, we're going to be taking care of it later through crime, through health issues, through mental health issues, and through homelessness. And so this is something we need to tackle quickly. And I know, I agree with Tina, we all have important causes. And I'm not just focusing on this one. And I realize that MAPS 4 is really important. But if we don't take care of our youth, we have failed ourselves. Thank you.
So do we take a second and vote or comments? So he's got a motion, he needs a second. Right. So there's a motion. Is there a second? And we'll have discussion. Is there a second? I second. Okay. Daisy seconds.
Lisa, can you bring that up?
The motion is to defer implementation and not take it up today
And
for approval.
to clarify that, the motion is to just defer it to our next meeting. And so it's not a lengthy delay. And I think the important point for that is we don't even have a subcommittee appointments yet. So I think that this is necessary for us to take a look at the implementation plan and make sure we're comfortable with it. I'm not asking for months. I'm just asking to the next meeting.
So we have a motion, we have a second, discussion. Bob?
Madam Chairwoman, just some comments. I'm listening to Councilman Stonecipher. I think I'm inclined at this point to support the motion, but I want to offer some comments with a little bit broader perspective than just the particular issue that he addressed. First of all, if you'll bear with me a second, I want to commend Jason and the ADG staff. It's remarkable the work that they have done in assembling information, analyzing it, crunching numbers. I know how complicated a process that is, and what you've presented is a marvelous presentation. Hard to absorb it all and understand it and figure out, how all the timelines mesh together. But I would go into looking at the implementation plan with the presumption that we ought to approve it. And I don't think this board ought to be in a position to micromanage and really try to get in and, well, let's adjust this by a quarter here or a month there, or $500 at this point. That's not our function. But I do have a concern in a larger sense that we really haven't, as an advisory board, been given an opportunity to really hash out things among ourselves about the implementation plan. We had those small group breakout sessions where we got a snapshot, mostly the same presentation, but collapsed down to about 45 or 50 minutes of time. We've had the plan available to us, and we've been able to study it, and marvelous presentation today. but yet it's presented to us as here it is. And there are aspects of it that I don't fully understand as to why certain things are being done. Let me just pull a random example from the Civil Rights Center. It was the first one you talked about today. It struck me when I looked at it. The first item on the timeline is the operator selection and coming to an agreement. And on this timeline, it's 2 years. I don't understand why it would take 2 years to select an operator and come to an operating agreement. Maybe it does, but I just don't understand it. I would want to explore that a little bit further, and what I would hope this group could do is have some opportunity to break down each one of these projects and explore the schedule. I was looking, for example, at the transportation one about the bus things, and you've obviously worked with them, Mark. I'm probably not going to have any question whatsoever about what their needs are and their timeline and the money they've got available to do what they want to do with the MAPS 4 money on top of it. And again, I don't want to micromanage that, and I'm probably not going to have many questions about that timeline. But there are others, and probably the youth centers would be another example. Is that the best we can do? If it is, and ADG can explain to us why it's the best that we can do, I'm all in favor of it. If there's another way to approach it and do something better, let's do it. But I think we have the obligation as an advisory board, not just to nod our head and accept what's presented to us without any questions or discussion whatsoever, but we really ought to bore into it. Again, not to the micromanage level, but just to come to an understanding that this is why you have proposed to do certain things, given the way you've crunched numbers and analyzed things and evaluated the prospects, so that we have an understanding. And then we, in good faith, and with our duty to the council and to our citizens, to say, we've looked at this, and ADG has done a marvelous job, and we're all in favor. This is the best plan we can come up with. But we arrive at that conclusion by having some opportunity at least, and I don't know exactly how we do that, whether we have another meeting or two where we take a handful of them at a time and just wade through them a little bit in more detail. And if we have any questions about it, there may be some project, there may be one of those 6 groupings that we look at and say, hey, you know, I don't have any questions, don't have any problems. But I'd like some opportunity to explore that in greater detail than what we have, other than, you know, being presented with nice charts that tell us a lot, but don't necessarily answer all of our questions. So that's my overall concern about approving something today, and why I would, with that specific reference to the youth centers issue, be in favor of deferring this for a little bit further discussion and questioning among this group, so that we all have a full understanding of what we're approving.
Yes, Harry.
Yeah, specific to the youth thing and going back and forth, you spoke in favor of the motion, speaking not technically against the motion. Well, technically against the motion, but not necessarily. But I would like Jason, I'd like for us to ask Jason to come and explain how the youth centers got where they did. Because in our small group, we did ask a couple of questions about, well, why was this here? Why was this here? And he had an explanation. I don't know if there's an explanation about the youth centers or not, but I'd like us to ask Jason to give an explanation.
Thank you, Harry. Jason?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Black. I appreciate that. So, absolutely, Mr. Nealon, I completely agree with what you're saying, and really that's what we're here for today. Any questions that you might have, we did our best, I think, over the course of the last 3 or 4 months. I know it was a lot of information, but we tried to take the board through each project a piece at a time so that we could have these conversations. We've had presentations. So I absolutely want to answer any question you have about any project in this program, because in reality, there's a reason that each one of these projects appear where they do. I think in the case of the Civil Rights Center, to use your example, as we, I think, discussed with the board to some degree, we've had a lot of conversations with the operator of that facility, Mr. Benton, Christina Beatty, their new project director, about how much time they need as an organization to get ready to open that facility. And so the construction schedule that you see on the program reflects that. the end date of construction. The operating agreement is somewhat extensive, but I think when I look at that, what I would say is that the length of time it takes to develop that operating agreement is really not going to have an impact on when they're going to be ready to open those doors. And so the end of that project will fall where they have indicated to us when they'll be ready to operate the facility. I guess what I would say on the youth centers, I guess what I would say more than anything else is like we wouldn't have brought this plan forward for your consideration if we didn't believe wholeheartedly in what we'd put together. So one of the things I think that we really thought about a lot and talked about a lot is presenting a balanced approach. The mayor's talked a lot about that's what makes MAPS such a beautiful program. There's something in it for everybody. And so we tried to put together a program schedule that we felt like echoed that spoke to each one of these projects in some form or fashion, that everyone got to move forward in some way early in the program. I think about the youth centers in particular. I think that what I would look to a lot is the fact that doing these in a sequential fashion, a lot of the reason that the projects are somewhat delayed from what Councilman Stonecipher referenced is the fact that we've allowed time early in the program schedule to select an appropriate operator, develop an appropriate operating agreement, and work with them on programming and planning of these facilities. And so I don't remember the amount of time that's in the beginning of the schedule, but there's probably about 18 months in the beginning of this program to allow us to do that. We've spent a lot of time with project advocates, and a lot of the conversations that we've had is we have to decide as a city what the goal of these youth centers are. It's not as easy as simply saying, go build me a youth center, because youth centers do all different kinds of things for different youth. And so we've tried to provide an allowance in the schedule for that. And so I think because of that, some of the construction is somewhat delayed. But the other thing I would say is that we have taken a phased approach. Obviously, it takes a while to get through those phases, but based on experiences that we've had in MAPS 3, that's a great opportunity for us to hit the mark on every one of these youth centers. It enables us to leverage lessons learned on work. So lessons that we learn on Youth Center 1, we can use on Youth Center 2. A great example of this would be the Senior Health and Wellness Centers with MAPS 3. We're going through the process right now of adding on to Wellness 1 and Wellness 2 because there were things that we could have done better and that we didn't understand the program well enough. We're not having to do that on Wellness 3 and Wellness 4 because we've learned those lessons. And so moving all of these ahead too quickly, I think we're at some risk of not being able to benefit from those lessons. And so I would comment on that. The other thing that I would say is we've tried to provide some time in the schedule on the youth centers in particular. You have to understand that this program schedule is just the brick and mortar part of it. The other part of the other half of this is operations. And so when we get done with construction and we open the doors, there's an entity that has to come forward and be ready to operate that facility. That means they have to scale up, they have to have staff on hand to operate that facility, they have to have funding in place to operate that facility. So I guess what I would say is I would just caution the board, I do think that there are improvements to the schedule that's presented that we could possibly look at that would check some of the boxes that Councilman Stonecipher referred to. I would just caution not to move them ahead too quickly because I think you run the risk of not being able to leverage these lessons learned. I think operationally there are maybe some challenges that may be a little bit heavier of a lift than they need to be if we were to do that. And so, again, we've put these on the schedule where we feel like they make sense. Not to say that we can't go back and look at it, not to say that we can't make some amendments, but that's why it's on the schedule as it's shown.
Thank you, Jason.
The only thing I'd say in response is with the youth centers, they're different than the senior wellness centers. We had never been down that road before. And in this case, Tim started on this work in 2017, and he hired consultants, and he has an OKC plan that he presented to the mayors and anybody that would listen to him. He met with Chief City, and we've already designated the hot spots such as Woodson Park. And so I think this is very different than the senior wellness centers. We didn't know what we were doing. We had to go to Arkansas to see what a senior wellness center was doing. Here we've got Tim's OKC plan, we've got the plan that they used in Iceland, and I think that allows these to move forward. I'm not asking for a lengthy delay, I'm just asking that we delay it to the next meeting. I'm also concerned that 2 of our members are not here today, and I think that they should have some input on this, and so I would ask for a very brief delay.
And Mark, I would just say that I mean, in the conversation that I had with Tim yesterday, it's already evolved and different from that plan. So there's still work that they're working on.
I don't think so substantially. And I do meet with Tim about 2 or 3 weeks on this, but there's not material changes, in my opinion.
Other questions or comments on any particular project or, Daisy, did you? I'm sorry? Okay.
Yeah, okay, I guess my understanding is that for the implementation plan, for the Innovation District and for the Coliseum, those were aligned with projects that are going on, and so those were pushed forward. So I think that there is a chance to do that as well, as how you speak to that. People are already doing the work. Why can't we do that for the youth centers? If people are already doing the work, okay, let's match it up and let's work together to get these things going, because obviously it's a need and an urgency, just as, I guess, the Coliseum and the Innovation District are looked as. So there is chance here, you know?
Yeah. And I think that can be said about a lot of projects.
Yeah. I think the questions I have, for example, one, why is bridge improvements placed ahead of our kids? And I just find that problematic. And Jason may have great answers on that. And David, who, like I said, was out of town last week and we really couldn't talk, he may have great answers. I just want to ask some questions, and I'm not asking for a lengthy period of time.
Yes, Bob?
I think a question for this group today with this motion pending is how can we effectively ask those questions and get answers to them? You know, really trying to sit around the horseshoe and just throw questions out at Jason and get answers doesn't seem to me to be a very effective way to do it. I'm not sure there's a way to break it into a small group.
David, would you be able to set up some small group meetings with Jason?
Sure. Yeah, the only difficult thing right now is vacation schedules. It gets a little difficult, but we can try and set something up like that. Do you prefer formal meeting, Councilman, or do you want smaller groups?
Small group meetings.
But I think to do what Bob is proposing, we got to be all together, which is an open meeting.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear Teresa.
Is that what you want, Bob, for us to meet as an entire group?
Well, I think eventually we need to meet obviously as an entire group and vote on the implementation plan or the recommendation. We could either do it in a small group, or it might be possible for all of us to sit down and submit written questions to Jason and to David on particular concerns that we have. And then they could respond in writing where we could all share that in advance, and we don't have to spend hours posing questions and getting answers, and yet we can all share that information.
I think the most effective would be to have a workshop with everybody there, so everybody hears
Agreed.
all the things that are said, and we don't have to repeat things twice and lose things in translation. So we'll just have to set something
And I
up.
think the workshop format gives us the opportunity to respond to some of those answers. If the board decides today that they don't want to move forward with the implementation plan.
And I think as the implementation plan gets pushed out to the public, we all will hear more from our fellow citizens about their concerns, because I know I have already received a few emails about the concerns of which is moving forward first and which is being pushed back later. And so for us to be together as one body, I can effectively say, okay, you know, somebody in Monique's ward and the ward that I live in share the same concerns, so we can hear that answer together. So we don't have to, Jason doesn't have to keep repeating this entire implementation plan over and over again like he did earlier last month.
So any more discussion on the motion to delay consideration of the implementation plan for 1 month? Any more consideration or any more discussion? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Let's please cast your votes. Right, so vote yes would be to defer. Vote no would be for us to go ahead today and consider approving the implementation plan as presented.
We're deferring for 1 month.
Yeah, well, that's the motion.
That's the
We'll
motion.
see what it ends up being.
Yeah, and it actually shows on the screen we're recommending approval of the implementation plan, because that was the pre-programmed motion that was in there, so we need to make clear that,
Okay, ours doesn't.
Active motion.
So vote with trust.
Get out of presentation?
I'm not in presentation.
no, I was back to. Okay, there we
We
go.
need it recorded.
So, I'm sorry,
Uh-huh.
say it again, so voting yes defers our.
Right, votes it for
At least 1 month.
at least 1 month.
Well, the motion is for a month,
Right,
Okay.
Okay.
to the next meeting.
to the next meeting.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, I guess my,
Yeah, with the workshop.
I'm sorry.
in between.
okay,
Say
I guess
again?
my concern is trying to get us together in a month.
Agreed.
And I just don't think it'll happen in a month. But, okay.
Teresa, while we're waiting,
Uh-huh.
while we're waiting for this to come up, the correct motion to come up.
Oh. I'm sorry, go ahead, Harry.
The goal, I agree certainly with David and others, the goal would be, the best would be for all of us to be able to come into a room one time. But as Dr. Bruner said, I think if we're trying to do that between now and the first Thursday in September, I can't imagine that that's going to be able to happen with everybody's schedules. So we may have to meet in a couple of meetings rather than everybody together and just share that information. I see the hand, but
We'll work through
We'll
that.
work
We'll
through
see.
but we do the best we can, but still not delay it. Get done what we can in a month and then come back and vote.
Okay. Okay, please cast your vote if you, I think some of us had our screens on presentation.
Computer.
Oh, computer?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, that was operator error on this end. We're down there saying,
Yeah, I'll vote.
okay? The motion passed to delay implementation plan. We will ask David if you would begin trying to coordinate getting us together as a group. Appreciate that. Any other discussion items? Okay. Any other comments by the board, staff, or citizens? Okay. Seeing none, I appreciate everybody's attendance today. We appreciate all of your thoughtfulness and care about MAPS 4. It's an ambitious project that we're thrilled to be a part of. So thank you, and we are adjourned.